We are now simulcasting the last 2 hours of this 4-hour weekday radio shows at prisonplanet.tv. For all the prisonplanet.tv viewers, I want to thank you for joining us and all of your support. I had checked into this book and seen really great reviews from a lot of researchers and historians that I respect. Haven't had a chance to read it yet. It's Russ Baker, Family of Secrets, the Bush Dynasty, the powerful forces that put in the White House and what their influence means for America. And separately in my own research, you have Prescott Bush, tied him in the military-industrial complex, the main Nazi agent in the United States, with the large banking combine here. And then you have him bringing Nixon in as a senator, setting him up. And then from the information that many other historians have brought out, like Tarpley, who, again, is not a, quote, right-winger, he called himself a progressive, the research that Nixon got out of control, and so they shot him down. Not saying Nixon's a good guy. The point is that was all a huge setup, and also to weaken the presidency at that time, so the national security state could fully take over the executive, and that's what we really face today. So just an amazing book, and it is, of course, Family of Secrets. Russ Baker, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure, Alex.
It's good to have you here. Okay, we're going to break in a few minutes. This is a short segment, but tell us about yourself, your research. You told me that researching for this book kind of changed your whole political paradigm, gets into a lot of the shadow workings of things, and C-SPAN just covered it for Book TV that'll be airing soon, or was it live?
Be airing soon.
Yeah, I've been on C-SPAN too. They wait a few weeks to air it. So Family of Secrets, critically acclaimed. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Well, I've been an investigative journalist for about 20 years. I would describe myself either as an alternative journalist working in the mainstream, or a mainstream journalist working in the alternative media. And I've written for publications varying from the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Esquire, to The Nation and The Village Voice, Huffington Post, a large range of different sorts of publications. And I am a reporter, and I think that there are different books on these subjects. Some people consider themselves scholars. Some people consider themselves activists. I'm essentially a reporter, and I just follow the facts wherever they go. And I began working on this book about 5 years ago, simply with the question, how did a guy like George W. Bush become the most powerful person in the world? I just found that to be a staggering proposition in and of itself, and I just wondered if there was not more to the story than we understood there to be. And so I began looking into him, and this led me to start examining his relationship to the people who backed him, his relationship to his father, and I really went down the rabbit's hole, Alex. I discovered a whole new understanding of American history of the last 50 years, and that's really what I hope we have a chance to talk about.
Yeah, Woodward and Bernstein with naval intelligence and the Bilderberg Group controlled Washington Post. They daringly went after Nixon. America learned how to fight back against corruption, and then meanwhile the shadow government really just got even more power and expanded their control. So I want to break this down after we come back from break, but continue in the time we've got left in this segment describing the book.
Sure. Actually, what happened was I'd been sent over, believe it or not, by the U.S. government to the former Yugoslavia, where I was asked to train journalists there in how to question authority and keep their government honest. And while I was working there, we had the run-up to the war in Iraq, the invasion, and people began asking me, what about your own government? How much do you understand about your own government, your own president, the decisions they make there? You're teaching us to do this work here. What about in your own country? And as I traveled around Europe, I just was staggered by the extent to which the popularity of the United States had just plummeted. And I just felt I had to get back and trying to answer these questions.
Now keep going.
Came back in 2004 and began traveling around the country. I came Austin here. It was one of the places I came to. And I began just assembling groups of people for drinks and just said, hey, what do you think is behind this Bush thing? Is there nothing more than a guy this seemingly untalented and this uninterested that he could just get to the top? Or was there something else going on? All that heavy money.
We're gonna tell that story that you compellingly document in Family of Secrets. Russ Baker, Family of Secrets. We've only got about 30 minutes left with him. Then we've got a guest coming on about mass graves they're building all over the country. We got photos of it. And then we got Webster Tarpley joining us from D.C. Russ Baker lives in New York. It's great to have him here on such short notice. We found out he was in town and got him in. He was here for C-SPAN. Next time you're here, please come in for a couple hours because the book is lengthy and the research is amazing. Go ahead and just run through it.
Sure. So basically what happened was when I got back in 2004, began traveling around the country, just asking open-ended questions. It might be what you'd call a real authentic intellectual inquiry. I had no agenda. I didn't know what kind of answers I was going to find. And that's the way I try to do all of my journalism. So one thing that I started looking at was George W. Bush's National Guard service. And I was intrigued by this because very clearly, it appeared that there were some questions about his record, and yet somehow they were so effective as a propaganda device, his administration, his team, that they were intimidating the media. They were turning this against John Kerry, who had served in Vietnam. And I was fascinated by that. So I began looking at that. Out of that came a piece I did for The Nation magazine, which won a Deadline Club award, basically establishing pretty conclusively that Bush had not finished, that he had gone AWOL, skipped the last 2 years of his military service, and that this had all been covered up. As I looked at that, I discovered that his father appeared to be involved in covering this up. Keep in mind, his father was the chairman of the Republican Party at the time that he was skipping out on his military service in Vietnam. Nobody ever asked the father, what did you know about your son's activities? And so I began to say, what is the dynamic between the father and the son? And we'd all been told that the father and the son were very, very different. The son was a real Texan, chewing tobacco, wearing cowboy boots. He was a different kind of a guy than the sort of stuffed shirt father. And what I discovered was that this purported rift between the father and son had been manufactured. That had been manufactured for the purposes of making the son electable, because the father, as we know, was defeated in 1992, and they wanted the son to appear to be a different kind of a guy. In fact, what I discovered at looking at the son was that he'd been involved in a whole bunch of companies that have never before been reported on. Just one of them is called Lucky Chance Mining. These are very, very interesting companies. Somehow these have eluded all of the biographers, all of the reporters in the Washington Post, New York Times, and so on that did stories about George W. Bush. And these companies are very interesting, Alex, because they have all the hallmarks of being intelligence operations. None of the companies make any money. They all have funds coming in from offshore accounts, from Saudis, money connected to Ferdinand Marcos, to the South African apartheid regime, to the Shah of Iran. Very, very strange outfits. And so I thought, well, what is this guy doing? What is George W. Bush doing? He's in these very strange outfits. And this forced me then to start looking at his relationship with his father.
And then we have George Herbert Walker Bush. So you start out an investigation of Bush, and it leads you back into the family history. I mean, where did this guy, suppose he never been in the CIA, the senior, and then suddenly he's director of the CIA, and then meanwhile they have ships named the Barbara, and there's
the Zapata.
Yeah, exactly. Their oil company involved in CIA operations, Bay of Pigs. But yeah, let's get into the roots of it, because it's just amazing, especially the Nixon tie-in.
Right. So what I did was I began looking at the father, and when I looked at the father, I wondered, why would they make him CIA director in 1976? This is a guy who's a purported intelligence virgin, a guy who doesn't have any background in intel. They supposedly put him in because they're claiming they're cleaning up the agency. Frank Church has his Church Committee, which is investigating all kinds of abuses, assassinations, etc., and they bring him in. Well, the answer is Poppy Bush is the nickname for the father. I called George, the younger one, W in the book, and Poppy, the father. Those are their nicknames, easier to distinguish between them. Poppy actually, it turns out, had a background in the CIA, not just 1976. I've got documents in the book where he's in the CIA in 1963 at the time of the Kennedy assassination, and he's in the CIA in 1953 when he starts Zapata and Zapata Offshore, and he begins traveling all over the world on business, even though he's got this tiny company with almost no justification for it. He's even putting offices in places like Medellin, Colombia, which is nowhere near the coast. I mean, why would you have an offshore drilling company that has almost no rigs with an office in a place like that? So I'm digging into the father. I discovered that the father basically had an entire secret life, that the oil man thing was a cover. Being a congressman was essentially a cover. The man he started Zapata with, a guy named Thomas J. Devine Jr., was a career intelligence officer, and he, quote-unquote, retired from the agency at the tender age of about 26 after they'd spent millions on him to go into the oil business with Poppy Bush. So this is the beginning. And then in Family of Secrets, I track this through very curious things about Poppy Bush at the time of the Kennedy assassination. He, by the way, has publicly said he cannot remember where he was.
But there's a CIA document that has a George H.W. Bush in the CIA and in Texas at the time, but they say, oh, that's another Bush.
Well, it wasn't another Bush. It was him. And
we have photos of him outside the school book depository. I mean, it's him. You can look at the photo. It's him.
One of the interesting things is that there are several memos. There's one from the day after the assassination in which the FBI is giving a briefing to George Bush of the CIA. There's another document from the day of the assassination where George H.W. Bush, clearly him with his address listed in a FBI document, he is calling in to say, I may know who has killed the president. And he wants to inform on a fellow. He says, I don't know much about this man. What I discover and I document in one of the 4 chapters of new material on the Kennedy assassination in Family of Secrets is that the man he was ratting out, at the very moment he was ratting him out,